The morning sun spilled across those magnificent marble columns, casting a golden glow that made even the most ancient grandeur feel like a movie scene. And then, the house was full of rich people who had come here to keep their legacy alive forever. As golden rays struck the bedroom floors, the first real alarm clock was ready to kick off another day. Jamie Welton woke up, soaked in morning chill, wide awake, bracing himself for reality despite his cozy velvet slippers. That kid actually rolled that ultimate gotcha game by birth, and it turned out like the best part of his life ever since he was born. He's the oldest son of this incredibly famous family, so he got everything handed him all at once like a free gift. Don't let the perfect resume fool your eyes. Beneath the shiny kid face lies a terrifyingly dark secret that could ruin everything you have built. He stepped behind the velvet ropes with a smirk, knowing exactly how much darkness was waiting for him to end everything. Controlling that kind of absolute chaos required a terrifying level of mental willpower just to weaponize the fallout without letting yourself go down in the process. Honestly, even the legendary 12 gods couldn't take him down in a fair fight. Their only desperate play was to seal him away entirely, praying they could put a lid on his god-tier potential before he got too big for them. He laughed and saw he had finally found out why he'd been locked up so long. The whole world would be gone if that prison stayed shut forever, so he bid his time to free himself and make sure people knew they could never trust a life in the dark again. He swore on his soul that the gods wouldn't be able to get away with a quick ending because he planned to drag them straight into absolute hell before he could do anything about it. Diablo Volfier guaranteed every terrifying promise he made would finally come back to him, even if he had to suffer through endless torture first. Ultimately, those 12 cowards locked up their master, but centuries later, the very wall that stopped them cracked open to give him the ultimate escape route, straight into a reincarnation cycle. While his shiny new parents were totally obsessed with their perfect baby, this tiny toddler was secretly plotting absolute dominance behind those innocent little eyes. He had been dying for a normal conversation until the moment his tiny voice couldn't take it anymore, forcing him into that high society life where everyone was just trying to feed him. His head still felt like it was spinning inside those tight little ears while the servants kept running down the halls to keep him busy, because no matter how many times he tried to hold himself back with all that VIP glory, the Dark Lord's wild mind always let loose and thrived on pure chaos. It was like a gilded cage where his tiny 9-year-old body was actually being held up by a fiercely loyal nanny who acted as his second mom, keeping him safe by spoiling things until they were rotten just for fun. As the second time she stepped into his bedroom, that pure, real smile finally cracked out of his tough, edgy face. She asked him what he was plotting so early in the morning and casually brushed it off, claiming he was just vibing with the sunrise. The nanny immediately gushed how adorable it was for a kid his age to get emotional over nature, which made her heart sink at that wholesome praise. But she wasn't there to chat. Instead, she reminded him that his mom had already gone downstairs waiting for her favorite son, and she quickly helped him speedrun his morning outfit while they navigated the massive hallways toward the dining hall. The nanny flashed a huge smile announcing that the young master had officially entered the chat, kicking off yet another super wholesome family breakfast. Jamie's inner dread was a shadow over the table, but his family's passionate, devoted love turned every moment into an exciting adventure that made him feel safe and loved for doing exactly what they wanted. The room was already filled with the sound of his father, mother, and little sister sitting together right there on the table. They all just exploded into light whenever they spotted him. He chose not to tear down the elite family's mellow energy by masking his fierce pride with a playful grin, then offered a warm, friendly hello to his team before they could even realize what was happening. He had been a newborn baby since he dropped into this world, where they worshipped his oldest son and wanted a hand in the galaxy. His parents were just staring at their kids with absolute stars in their eyes, utterly obsessed with how aesthetically perfect their genetics turned out. Jamie's mom, Sears, dished her snob a pass by becoming an affectionate mother, while her current dad, Argina Welton, kept the royal headmaster title and even took home one of the kingdom's 5 sword masters titles. So he was a god-tier warrior, but also a total family guy. So when Jamie's little sister named Sarah arrived, she looked like a cartoon princess who made people want to shoot guns just to see her smile. Daddy's little princess was a rule that nobody could refuse, because the entire staff just tripped over themselves trying to pretend they were following orders while making her every tiny wish come true. No matter how much Jamie felt guilty about spoiling him or acting too grateful, he had to swallow his pride and follow the princess regardless of whether she asked for anything specific. Jamie was desperate for an innocent little boy persona to keep playing this loving house while his perfect sibling drained him down to zero energy. Once the dinner circus ended, he let out a sigh and retreated into his own safe haven, belly flopping onto the mattress before burying his face in the pillows. Finally, peace felt like a sudden hit on a cold knife when he saw people genuinely care for each other. Witnessing the kindness gave him major whiplash and turned his ruthless past life into the opposite of it. At least this massive estate packed with ultimate perks like an epic private library to kill time and was still there, even though being trapped in a toddler's body without proper speech had pushed him to the edge of insanity. While watching that weird little creature flutter his way made him sigh at how exhausting he felt turning out to be. Still, complaining felt pointless as he hit the ultimate jackpot and, more importantly, a second chance to fight back. Plus, this reincarnation came with a brand new skill that was about to flip the script entirely. Gripping the familiar in his palms, his thoughts darkened as he remembered the 12 gods who condemned him to an agonizing void of nothingness. They held onto their shaky belief in a way that made them feel like total worms sucking up the power of worship. He had a mind full of jokes and endless time to upgrade, yet the world above him held no knowledge about the terrifying magic that tore at it. He could easily turn this ignorance against the arrogant 12 gods who had labeled him dead just as quickly. But when his dark plotting was completely derailed by his nanny's arrival, he knew he would only have time to grind in the shadows until he became too strong to unleash absolute hell alone. Jamie suddenly understood exactly why the cringe fest was an impossible trap. Refusing was already ruled out, not even if he wanted it that way. He took another slow drag of his breath and mentally rehearsed his act just to keep moving forward. His dead eyes snapped toward that innocent, cheerful smile he'd been waiting for all along. A tiny part of him genuinely thought the lock on the void might be having to act like a giggling toddler every single day, even in the dark. Downstairs, his mom and little sister were already waiting on the couch, totally hyped for some quality bonding time because, shockingly, this family actually liked each other. Meanwhile, Jamie was violently fighting his inner Demon King urges. Yet he dropped to his knees in front of his mom, flashing a megawatt smile. "What are we reading today?" he chimed, radiating pure, unadulterated sunshine. The sweetest moment in the house made everyone on the sofa freeze instantly. Feeling too soft to stand up, they jumped forward and squeezed him tight, screaming about how much they loved their little boy. When Sarah finally calmed down, her mom showed up with a magical story titled The Great Magician Hines. She asked if they were really excited before diving straight into the tale without a second mistake. But by the time the music faded, Sarah was already asleep again and lost the whole plot. The fairy tale ended with a happy ending, and she looked down eagerly while Sears grinned and said, "We're in the book." Jamie also laughed so hard his eyes popped open. Wanting to grow up like that wizard was already overpowered. Meanwhile, melting on the spot, gave him his mom's soft pat and whispered he could easily reach such greatness. She told Jamie that her dad had already crushed 3 rival magic instructors in a single day. For Jamie, that was just an easy win for him, since those guys were so clumsy and untrained that breaking them was practically child's play. She added that she'd used some of the strongest mages available to help crush them all, knowing his dad could only trust him with his big money because he had a bunch of VIP connections. Jamie was trying to push himself off the floor so he could sneak away, but she kept pulling him in for that sweet bear hug just to keep them both safe from the rest of the world while Sears begged him to stay and chill because his kid was acting so sweet. But let's be real. He's plotting his escape route while praying she backs off so he can score some alone time. It turns out the mission is all done, and he slips away from his smothering mom to completely ghost everyone by locking himself in the library to vibe with a heavy-duty magic tome. Snap! The cover slams shut. He just speed ran the entire thing, flexing a massive brain pan that completely shatters the illusion of him being a normal 9-year-old. He cracked this book open hoping for some high-tier mana hacks, but honestly, it was a total nothing burger. Zero new intel, just pure disappointment. He snaps back from his exhaustion and is suddenly thrust into a scene where a random man scoping out the hallways is actually flexing over ultra-rare artifact for the Welton family while he scans him through locked eyes, making it look like a serious invasion of his property. Suddenly, he felt a deep, crushing pressure that made his ears pop as insane amounts of invisible energy surged through the air in a swirling storm. A level 7 Grand Mage is whispering to us that teleportation must be the only way to get past security checks. The alarm rang loudly in the dark office, but as he walked past the door, realizing it wasn't for the job, the guy was just so chill and unbothered that he didn't even notice. The old man locked onto Jamie like a hawk, dissecting every tiny smile as the kid squinted at the room. Finally, Jamie barked, demanding to know who this intruder thinks he is, and immediately the air went cold. His mana flared with pure killing intent, making the old mage smirk instantly, knowing that the apple never really fell far from that terrifying Welton tree. Our guy knows protocol says he should bow down, But nope, he just glares back, practically choking on the sheer audacity and crushing pressure of his boomer stare. Being treated like a lab rat, absolutely triggering. He is itching to drop a nuke of a spell, just to prove he's built different. The graying wizard took careful mental notes, while hearing crazy rumors about this little kid's specs were completely true. The kid was so excited he couldn't believe a 9-year-old could pack such heavy heat, and his absolute zero fear of danger was actually just making the situation even worse. He's determined to push the boundaries of physics and wonder what could happen if he tackles an object that seems too strong for even his own power. Jamie snapped at the random NPC because he felt blatantly disrespectful. That random guy was trying to check his stats, and it wasn't worth a nerve, but Jamie tapped back into his true self, Diablo Volthier, the legendary monster who wiped out pantheon gods in his lifetime. So yeah, this geezer just signed his own death warrant. In an instant, Jamie unleashes a mana blast that sends shockwaves crashing straight toward the man to deliver a brutal reality check. The old mage barely blinks. Instead of reacting, he just stares blankly at the Webtoon prodigy. But then the mood shifts instantly. The old man's smirk vanishes from his face as his eyes widen in shock because he completely underestimated the monster standing right in front of him. Jamie was already trembling as he slammed his fist against the wall, revealing a terrifyingly salty aura from the explosion. The sharp-eyed elder laughed loudly, eyes wide with pure awe because it really shocked him that such a tiny kid could carry the weight of apocalypse in his hand. He lets out a breath and drops those heavy props to hype up the kid's lightning reflexes right away, then announces he'll be dealing the damage and flipping the script with ease. Jamie feels incredibly happy at being downplayed, while an experienced older man guides him through a genuine battle that makes his heart race with excitement. You're right to pause here. Look at that magic formula being woven by the old man. It seems incredibly wild and strange when it clashes with someone else's head-to-head battle. Jamie's quick eyes snapped open and caught the ball hitting the plate with one hand. He laughed as he realized the strike was completely off target and missing by an incredible distance. This absolute gigachad move leaves the old mage completely frozen in shock, unable to comprehend why the little kid stood right there and refused to flinch at that high-level spell. Suddenly, a massive shadow drops between them, and Jamie's father appears with an angry glare. His voice cracks an octave to warn the elder he crossed a huge red line, while Jamie feels furious because some hotshot guest wants to jump him like an amateur. The Count instantly lowers his guard, dropping to one knee as he frantically checks on Jamie before switching off into full protective dad mode after that chaotic magical crossfire. Jamie laughed as the lights dimmed for an Oscar-winning scene. Instead of hiding behind a mask, he turned on his water taps just like an average 9-year-old, clutching himself to reality while crying out fake apologies for being completely fine. Seeing those tears, that's the final straw. His dad absolutely loses it, forcefully dragging Marquis, Lin-Mel away for a very hostile chat, while Jamie smirks, internally realizing without his dad stepping in, the kid didn't even flinch, straight up flexing his absolute zero fear. Instead of getting mad, the silver-haired dude just cracked up, totally caught off guard by the sheer disrespect of this hilarious standoff. Catching his breath, he admitted he was low-key jealous of the Count. Why? Because this boy was packing some insanely overpowered potential just waiting to be unleashed to shake the very foundations of their world. He didn't feel like he was connected to that superfluous buzz. Instead, he felt completely frustrated because he couldn't figure out why an adult would try to summon a power just for a little kid's sake. In that moment, three friends found themselves drifting into a cozy lounge, laughing over something absurd as one guy demanded they explain everything. In a voice dripping with venom, the man roared that this was his flesh and blood, the future lord of the Webtoon house, turning that unhinged stunt into a massive red flag for everyone to see. But even with a furious dad breathing down his neck, Marcus stayed ice cold while acting like it was just another Tuesday. That arrogant chill only threw gasoline on the fire, triggering the Count's explosive aura that could easily make a veteran spellcaster wet their pants, proving why he was a top-tier swordmaster. Unbothered, Marcus leaned in and asked how much the Count actually knew about his own kid, because honestly, missing this kind of talent was practically a crime. Argino blinked, completely stunned by the sudden twist of the question. The old man deadpanned, refusing to be fooled. He wasn't even asking for any cap at all, but rather a certified prodigy who could handle his own perfect grindstone. Argino pulled back a heavy, exhausted breath when he realized this was exactly the reason he had gone looking for that legendary guy in the first place. But instead of meeting him, he found his son chasing after him and having to risk everything for their lives together. Marcus looked through the window and saw his own father staring at a wall as if he couldn't hear anything but his own thoughts. He leaned back against the doorframe and slid into the room behind him, letting the son's loud words roll right off his tongue. The strongest 8th class sorcerer who ever lived had nothing but gospel truth in his mouth. So when that voice dropped out, doubt began creeping into the father's mind. He wondered if he was hooting over his boy too much, because it took a real wizard like him to actually figure out the kid's true stats. But right now, the legendary old man stood staring at a wall of white lines where no answer existed, forcing Argino to scramble and try to figure out what was really happening behind them. Marcus dropped his heavy bag and walked away flatly, telling Argino that despite his own lack of talent, he wasn't actually qualified to take this boy on a mission. The man in blue felt his jaw hit the ground as if punched by a falling stone. If magic could never handle it, who would dare try? Marcus stepped up and told everyone about the tiny Jamie who was basically a toddler, but somehow figured out how to make all those spell moves work perfectly from scratch. The Count mind had instantly shut down because the game was too hard to beat that way, even when his kid looked so big and smart. Marcus spotted the boy calculating the exact spot where the spell would land and immediately decided to ignore the danger entirely, feeling utterly unbothered by his own arrogance. Jamie could easily break into Tier 3 by just grinding alone, yet even ignoring the weak kid's damage buff made his real power jump to Tier 4. The kid treated a name like a scold because he felt the weight of being called a prodigy and the crushing silence of his entire world collapsing on him before he even realized it was just an insult. Marcus pleaded with the Count so he could finally pull a bunch of real resources, knowing that traditional schooling proved completely useless for a mutant destined to crack the 9th class. Argino stood alone, spiraling like a falling star, because he never imagined his heir would pack such god-tier talent that completely shattered the ceiling of his dreams. Instead, he white-knuckled his fists desperately trying to keep his poker face intact, watching the old man hyped up his boy to the moon. Jamie felt his heart jump when he heard his future son would be a legendary 9-tier king, instantly reminding everyone of how it really happened and forcing him to scrap his usual parenting routine from scratch. Marcus stepped back from the velvet sofa to let the silence breathe around him while his father stared at the fading magical spark on the floor. He casually tossed that line, so the magic world stood right at the edge of a big, terrifying revolution, where every wizard in the circle would feel their power vanish and the very earth flip upside down, while everyone else watched with wide eyes as long as he didn't fire a spark. The argument that Argino's little kid possessed the ultimate secret weapon to topple an 8th rank god was so insane it made his brain spin on overdrive. Now he had to find a way to nurture this wild, OP trait without robbing his boy of a normal childhood, especially since the kid probably didn't even realize how busted he was. It was a brutal dilemma. Argino was a family man first, fiercely protective of his son's innocence, yet knowing one wrong move could derail a destiny that would change history forever. Outside that window, the sky was turning a deep, bruised purple as twilight settled in over the foggy horizon. The moon slipped through the mist, marking the end of this wild and uncontrolled night. The Count slowly retreated into his master's bedroom, letting his stoic mask slip so he could just breathe as Jamie was completely wiped out by the wizard. Honestly, dealing with her mom's absolute meltdown after she spotted that gray hair guy had been a massive waste of time turned draining to nothing. She was in full mama bear mode, terrified for her kid's safety, and swore it would never happen again. At first glance, the day felt like a huge blip, but honestly, this bizarre act handed him the biggest win of his life. Getting hit by that guy's spell wasn't just magic. It was a disguised blessing that forced Jamie to record every detail, breaking down the mana structure and realizing this mysterious dude was built differently than anyone else. But when Count Welton moved into Jamie's house with such deadly precision, he left everyone speechless. He knew his dad was a monster, yet seeing him wield an absolute god-tier sword gave him reason to fear the man. Just as Jamie was hyping up his father in his mind, suddenly that same old wizard materialized right behind him and whispered, "What's got you smiling like that?" before slamming Jamie's soul into its own body. The child was instantly stunned by the wizard, who had vanished entirely, leaving no trace of his magic behind to make Jamie's radio waves go silent. Marcus grinned and roasted the boy while he tried to remember that a stranger was still sleeping on his own bed, leaving him completely confused by the noise of breakfast. After the initial spike of fear faded, Jamie turned his frustration into a stormy rage as he stared at that elderly man who had completely slipped through his lines of defense. Honestly, Marcus had successfully rattled that guy. Jamie sat there sweating bullets and furiously calculating an escape route as he wondered what this creep wanted in his room. Marcus cracked up, totally amused by how easily the kid jumped. The old wizard completely forgot he was technically bullying a literal 9-year-old. Jamie waved his hands away from the scolding, racing his thoughts back to the terrifying plan he had devised when the manor's walls just let him in. Casually, the geezer teleported in and suddenly felt like a grand mage who never allowed anyone to pass through the door. He leaned in to tease Jamie for acting like an angel when his dad was right there. But then as soon as they were alone, the kid threw off every mask instantly. Defensively, he snapped back that dealing with family versus stalking needed two totally different personas, just so Marcus could laugh harder. Old man wiped his tears and sighed, admitting he'd been too exhausted to try anything new for the kid. Jamie stared blankly at the absurdly powerful stranger who treated his ancient grimoire like a grandparent's treasure chest rather than a game upgrade. The wizard shouted that his old books were full of crazy tricks, so Jamie got free early slots for them. He immediately knew he had nothing to lose by fighting that huge gap between old magic and the new powers everyone else is using right now. Jamie didn't think he was stupid. If he really wanted to beat this new digital age, learning how to adapt would be a must-have priority. The long nap had clearly left him far behind on the game's progress. Sudden silence fell over the room when Marcus froze, his hands hovering near his chest as he locked eyes with the stranger. That same old man's aura flickered into something far more dangerous, shouting that he was betting huge on this kid standing right in front of him. Jamie stared blankly at Marcus, sweat dripping from his brow. Marcus challenged Jamie by promising he'd never let the boy out of his power again before they met. Plus, according to Master, his current spellbook was straight-up ancient history, meaning he couldn't crack Marcus's magic until he cracked the code himself. Hyped out his mind, he inhaled every single page, completely locked in as reality hit hard. The stuff wasn't just fascinating, but insanely complicated. To make it work, he literally had to feel every microscopic particle of mana seeping into his pores and flooding his veins. It was a tight moment that demanded absolute precision from both your body and your brain to pull off that move in the most intense way possible. The guy smashed down into the bed, staring blankly at a potential killer who just wanted to be the most terrible prankster in history. He realized then that his boring, traditional ways had actually been way smoother and far better than trying to pull off those ridiculous freaks. But then his massive ego kicked in, revealing himself as the one and only Diablo Volfer, because quitting wasn't even part of his DNA. He bounced right back up, gears turning as he mapped out a brilliant strategy to conquer this new challenge. Seconds later, he was staring down exactly where that same textbook had been raging quit moments ago. A light bulb went off. This guide was a total game changer, and he silently sent a thank you to the old wizard. He suddenly vowed to eat every single word he heard and use that power to boost his own stats. But first he wanted a super strong helper to keep up. With just a quick handshake, Pip materialized from nowhere like an instant teleporter, making Jamie wonder how fast the tiny eyeball appeared when it was supposed to wait for orders. Jamie grabbed a handful of magic from the ceiling and threw it at the desk, where the familiar was already ready to help his boss. It seemed like a shadowy monster was hiding behind him and locking eyes with an excited vision of perfect precision while hyper-focusing to make sure he could actually do it. Jamie's eyes widened in surprise as he watched, ready to unleash all his might right away, so he could finally get started on cooking. Jamie stepped out on time and immediately hit that hard roadblock. His body was suddenly capped at how much mana he could handle, but the textbook needed precise measurements, almost impossible to micromanage manually. Yet Jamie knew a major cheat code worked like magic. Black acted as a perfect automatic filter, keeping him safe from burnout in his mind and body. Thanks to their soul contract, the familiar could slice the energy output into the exact microdoses required. Problem solved. Black was the ultimate hack for mastering this next-generation magic system, and Jamie had to speedrun this whole process just to keep up with the current era's elite prodigies. With the first hurdle cleared, the second issue didn't seem nearly as intimidating. He just had to work around the fragility of his current 9-year-old vessel's fragile stats. The fix was simple, spreading that energy load evenly across his entire nervous system. Boom! Flawless. He kept grinding those magic experiments all night in a blur, while hours vanished behind him. But since it had been literally hours with zero noise from his bedroom, his nanny and dad finally posted up at his door, totally weirded out by his absolute radio silence. She stepped through the locked door and froze mid-step, because she suddenly realized her own brain had failed to process the terrifying situation properly. But even his own dad could feel the energy shift before he saw him. He didn't even blink because the magic around him hummed so loudly that his eyes were too sleepy to catch it. The old man sat in silence, completely captivated by the sudden surge of magic that flooded Jamie's energy like a river rushing through his chest. The kid knew the secret wasn't in magic. He just had a gift for magic that would make him a legend. Blown away, the house boss banned Jamie from interrupting his grind today. He stationed a few VIP maids outside as safety net if the kid woke up needing anything, while his poor nanny stressed out so hard she was trying to figure out exactly what her young master had been doing all along. The Count's brain went into overdrive because if Jamie ditched the sword to become an elite spellcaster, it completely changed the game. Jamie slammed into the game with a genius-level instinct that completely changed their entire family's future, instantly dwarfing their magical heritage he inherited from his mother. That level of brilliance shattered every expectation, making his relatives look like absolute amateurs compared to him. The Count was hyped. Jamie could legitimately reach legendary tier 9, a realm Marcus had predicted, while the kid himself was just chilling in his room, grinding away to crack the code of his own magic. He dove deep inside his spiritual core with desperate focus to figure out the rules behind this brand new power system. Well, he was brand new here, but somehow used that exact same magic back in his past life. Snap! His eyes snapped open, and he broke free from that intense trance. He had been there for hours analyzing his own energy like an open book, a grin spreading across his face as he cracked it all to perfection. Splitting raw mana into tiny particles was usually chaotic chaos, which threw him off at first. But after just a couple of tries, it clicked like magic pieces falling from the sky. Still, he slammed into the 4th tier of mana like a bad guy trying to catch a falling object. For someone with such god-tier ambition, hitting it at all was nothing compared to his own heartbreaking technique. Just hours ago, however, he had grabbed the control technique by accident and hit that same hard wall straight up, telling me how terrifying that speed felt. He knocked so hard it sounded like a gunshot while trying to reach the door at the 5th level, forcing him to accept reality before his fragile skin could burn away. Sitting beside him, his shadow pet was already on guard, sensing every little twitch in his boss's mood and whispering a soft warning of caution. A quick telepathic chat from Jamie settled quickly. He threw the towel back into play because making himself disappear wasn't an option right now. The real gods were also coming to investigate soon, so instead of letting them destroy him, he dressed up as invisibility to dodge all those annoying questions sent by the servants. It felt like time was finally running out. He hurried to step outside and check on his dad, knowing that if this dark entity found him in the manor, everything would be lost forever. Black grabbed the heavy mana residue with such precision it left no room for error. It flowed perfectly through him instantly, watching as a silent master trained his young self just to get here. Being bound as a familiar meant their teamwork was entirely telepathic and seamless. His dad wouldn't suspect a thing. Once the room was completely scrubbed of any magical fingerprints, the coast was finally clear. Jamie headed for the door, but let's be real. Even with zero effort, the guy just naturally oozed a crazy heavy aura. His base stats were simply too massive to mask completely. Cut to the Count's office. The boss was booked and busy chasing a very pushy new guy who needed an audience, even though everyone else was packed with their own plans. He slipped in smoothly and explained that this area is essentially a dead zone for religion, then thanked the Zenith Church for finally settling down on its turf. Count Argento played it cool, claiming he only green-lit the project because faith keeps locals happy and productive. It seemed like a simple business deal, but his rep looked by his totally clinical answer. The guy was sweating and wondering why the Count couldn't hide something secret off their books, terms he never discussed. Argento's tone froze as he made it crystal clear that every move he made is strictly to benefit his land, since these holy men were stepping onto his property. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A polite chat turned into an iron grip on the vibe wrapped up in a quick power play conversation, where he pointed at the door, urging the guests to beat it if they had so much holy work to do. Tossing out a fake wish for safe travels, they traded awkward goodbyes beneath the so-called blessing of Zenith. The air in that room suddenly got tight, as if it could shatter glass, and Argento locked onto his perfect poker face, so hard it didn't even notice the cold ice on his lips until the heavy oak doors finally clicked shut behind him. Then when he was alone again, a deep, dark and stress-struck glare popped into his eyes. Jamie was so quiet outside that everyone thought he was just chilling while the team waited for the big reveal. But he knew they were coming, and his oldest son heard every single word of it all along with him. So there had to be some serious story happening right now inside the office. Peeking around the corner, his face twisted in terror as his worst nightmare literally unfolded right before his eyes. He tried to convince himself he was paranoid, but nope. Right there, stitched on the guest robes, was the cursed crescent moon and yellow sphere, along with that suffocating divine pressure rolling off him. He couldn't hide behind a wall. Instead, pure unhinged rage surged through his body and tore open his heart as he tried to enter his own sanctuary. The sudden arrival sent an earthquake of terror through the empty room. Why would Jamie invite his stern father into this insane cult meeting when he had never bowed to anyone before? The plan was already dead, so Jamie locked down the backyard and vowed that no matter what came next, he'd burn it all down in silence. But then he realized he couldn't just hide. He needed a way to make everyone believe something new could grow there. He decided to turn his dad's stubborn anti-religious views on their head by hiding evidence of ancient secrets under the cover of midnight and digging deep into the family's history for proof that was far beyond what any sane man would accept. Stepping into the Welton estate's grand parlor, the air felt strictly corporate, a heavy vibe since his dad usually booked this space for high-stakes VIP meetings. Argento stood in a room full of screaming demons and felt like he was about to explode from all that stress after dropping so many brutal choices, but instead he gently shook his son out of it by asking how much time his kid was up for. Jamie caught a blinding smile while eagerly nodding, completely unaware that he might be playing with fire when he found himself surrounded by someone who seemed to know exactly what to do next. The Count dropped his casual remark about Jamie's magic obsession, causing our boy to flinch as his aura screamed the truth. Yet this chess match felt like a wall pressing down on the patriarch, who forced Jamie to look at him while he refused to hint that he knew secrets instead of just asking if everything was okay. Even though he asked fully expecting a generic brush-off rather than an emotional dump, suddenly the Count shattered silence and spilled his darkest fears. He admitted he originally thought Jamie would grow up average, but reality just hit like a truck. His kid had god-tier abilities that nuked any chance of living quietly. It was an absolute double-edged sword because standing out from the crowd turned into suffocating weight. You couldn't pawn it off or erase it from your DNA. You had to swallow the isolation. Jamie was a bright kid who suddenly had no future because everyone wanted to make him suffer. He kept doing things that made people think he could succeed, only to find out the moment he grew old enough to be an adult, those same hungry fans would turn on each other and tear his face off. It was a dangerous red flag for Jamie's survival. The dark room, filled with whispers, Argento's knuckles turned white as he fought a fierce battle against his own chaos and terror, desperately trying to keep his child safe from falling through the cracks in reality or spiraling into nightmares that could permanently ruin magic for him. Taking a deep breath, Jamie stepped aside as if running from powerful spells and let go whenever he needed to. But when he decided to grind harder, his father would keep chasing him relentlessly. Surprisingly, despite being haunted by dark magic, the kid barely blinked at all, completely unfazed by what was happening right in front of him. With zero hesitation, Jamie boldly proclaimed that dropping magic wasn't a choice. It meant the absolute world belonged to him forever. A wild burst of fire truly ignited a spark of wonder in Max's soul, as he dreamed of letting his character reach their full potential while staying completely on track for everything else to come. But while Jamie was physically impossible for an 18-year-old, a chilling realization hit him as his aura violently leaked off like lightning. It turned a slightly weird moment into something totally alien because he could literally feel his son's raw energy radiating through the room, watching in sheer terror. This completely shattered his expectations and made Jamie realize how much more power than he had ever imagined was inside him. It's unbelievable how violent the blood was spilling through every hole on his skin, but basic magic rules say mana only wants to pull things together like a sponge. He instead tore apart the universe with his own hand. Jamie grinned at Marquis Limmel's grimoire as if it contained a secret weapon, then dropped it like an explosive bomb to see just how far Jamie could go with his quick-fire memorizing of core concepts and his knack for untangling spell formulas that keep the darkness in check. Jamie stood frozen in a room full of static, his mind racing at 100 times over while his dad's jaw slammed down against the floor so hard he couldn't move again as the endless leveling speed from one textbook finally overwhelmed him and cut off all time. The mental arithmetic had driven Argento toward his mind's eye, where he saw a world of myths that made his son feel like the ultimate legend himself. The dark, violent blow he struck against that 9-year-old monster was so intense it made his heart ache and made life itself seem like a silly play to compare to the power magic wizards once thought they held. Jamie felt the mood shift and instantly flipped the switch, turning into an utterly clueless kid who couldn't figure out why his dad had a total meltdown. Realizing he might have been too aggressive to flex a little earlier, he quickly dialed back his old acting skills. Now he was dropping the ultimate dad praise, screaming how insanely proud he was of today's mind-blowing progress. A giant, blazing grin instantly lit up the kid's face while they were completely melted by the truth that their father called them a prodigy. The boy got his hair neatly combed in an affectionate ruffle before he pushed himself off the chair and stepped out to take some quiet time as his family worked through all the clues. cut to a man who was counting down seconds until he finally got out of face, completely done acting like a naive kid blushing over a simple compliment. Deep down, Jamie fully clocked the real reason they were hyping him up. But plot twist, Argento's eyes locked onto Black. He flat out asked if that shadow was his familiar. Cue the internal panic. Jamie had been busting his back to keep his little pet off the radar for as long as humanly possible. He lost everything on his own because that secret was so dangerous that he couldn't see a single thing coming until it had already happened, leaving him completely surprised with something nothing could possibly explain at all. Jamie was so completely oblivious to what his dad had done that the magical creature's shape, which Jamie thought was a bat, instantly looked like a dark shadow before the old man even started grilling about its origins. He instantly melted away to embrace his son, feeling nothing but pure pride as he realized how incredibly talented that little one had become. Just as the door clicked shut, Jamie felt absolutely drained, dragging himself to his room to fully recharge his social battery after a lifetime of filming that fake family sitcom. Jamie stepped onto the busy city street just as the sun dipped below the horizon and locals began shivering from the morning heat, turning their faces toward a new world of ghosts who refused to shake their heads when they saw him walking past them. Oh dear, he slipped away from the world entirely because of his favorite shadow, who was bound by a strict rule that told him not to break any rules, no matter how big or small. My kid was chasing a crazy group of people who were attacking our home because they hated us, so we went out hunting them all the way through and found them dead on our own land. And then the midnight recon started right away. And using Black as his personal drone, he flew down to snatch an aerial shot of those neon-lit streets. He didn't wait for too long when he caught a couple of goons talking right next to crates. And it turned out they were wrestling with an urgent order from the top bosses that needed their attention before the shift ended. Philip, the guy at the top of the line who had a quiet job, but no boss, actually felt bad about his mistake and was running from the group he was supposed to lead. Jans wasn't even a bossy jerk. He was just a low-level grunt who knew exactly where his superiors were holding the whole team's attention because they needed that extra buck before payday hit. It seemed like in their eyes, Hayes had become a completely secure place where no one could ever get close to crossing any big red lines, even though the idea of running away from human trafficking sounded like an instant death wish. Still, the guy couldn't get low enough to stop obsessing about the insane payout, treating every dollar like it could literally rocket him out of the dark. Sure, the odds of surviving this heist were practically zero, making it a seriously toxic gamble. It was an absolute house of cards, volatile as a spark in a hurricane. If they got busted, the fallout would be legendary. He was already going to burn down the whole neighborhood if the kid talked about running a family business right under their door. It was no surprise that the criminal underworld vanished on this exact day. The Count held a weapon so strong it could wipe out every gang member instantly. Yet the mastermind running the plan seemed completely delusional about how they could ghost the authorities and take all the loot without even getting a scratch. The grunt crew remained utterly clueless on how to outsmart the sword master despite rumors suggesting their backs were facing the real threat. That fact offered absolutely zero comfort for anyone else's nerves. They found themselves trapped at the edge of a cliff, forced to decide whether to shoot themselves in the face, run off with their lives, or expose the mastermind behind the nightmare they were all trying so hard to avoid. They finally understood they had no choice but to hide everything under the rug while trying to find someone else who could take it all away from them. Their only hope was to pack up and run, but running off the map would be too easy for this gang. They needed every inch of the territory before they could even start hunting down their victims again. All the planning boiled down to one thing: buying a few more days in peace so they could hustle hard until they finally found enough gear to vanish completely. Both were shaking, tossing their comfortable lives into the trash for some wild goose chase that wasn't on their game plan at all. And they realized this whole mess was caused by someone who had pitched a human trafficking ring as a simple idea. It would just blow them away from day one with no way back. The hair on their backs snapped upward as they stepped out from the darkness to reveal a little guy who seemed to be stealing the top-tier secrets of a big name. The tension in the alley suddenly exploded as they desperately tried to scrub their tracks so their circle could stay completely closed, but then a random brat just crashed into their private pity party. Jamie just stood there, flashing a cocky smirk and daring them to ask the real question. Did they really have enough clues? They weren't in the mood for riddles. Not at all. If even a whisper of their syndicate's plans leaked out, they were dead meat. Zero hesitation. A group of thugs whipped a nasty right hook straight across the kid's face, trying hard to keep their small spy from sneaking out again. The second thug, a towering giant in disguise, surged forward with his entire body locked into a wall of force as they breached the edge of the map. The team was now on their own. This guy had to get rid of him. But as they were about to smash the air, Jamie vanished in a thin air before the punch could hit his knuckles, sending a wave of pure panic through them. This meant he'd signed up for their own death warrant and turned out to be one of those walking time bombs who spill secrets straight onto the heavy hitters waiting to wipe them all out. Before they even saw him blink, that chilling voice behind them shouted, calling them absolute brats, which Jamie casually admitted was way too spicy for him. Just walk away without doing a full interrogation. Jamie slammed his fist into the air, sending a wall of black energy straight for Jamie's chest, making the thugs run away screaming that he had just obliterated them in an instant. The team's minds went dark as they stumbled into an impossible twist, leaving them helpless until this overpowered kid laid the law for them. It took no time to crack under pressure, but lying wasn't even on the table anymore when someone like a god-tier menace was breathing down their neck. Both criminals were terrified of the card trick, so self-preservation won over their fear. It turned out that surviving the monster kid mattered far more than saving those trashy bosses they tried to protect. Jamie soaked up every word like a sponge as his blood slowly began to boil. He stood face to face with this terrible trafficking ring, the absolute lowest of the low, and he thought it was just filth he despised more than any other living thing breathing around him. Jamie couldn't even wrap his head around their stupidity. They were so stupid they could get away with selling human lives for a quick cash grab. Did they seriously think karma would not catch up? He stared at the floor and felt the weight of 1,000,000 dead people sitting on their own feet. The arrogant officials had turned everyone else's lives into toys they could trade for money, making them little more than empty chess pieces that would only serve to ruin the rest of humanity. But what really bothered Jamie was why those towering bosses were so confident they could stop the war without a single flag showing a massive conflict ever happening. Anyone with a working brain knew exactly how fierce that reputation was. He would burn their entire operation to ash like nothing else. As Jamie pieced together the puzzle, a heavy, unexplainable dread settled in his gut. Time was up. He needed to finish wrapping this little interrogation up. Focusing his mana, he locked onto their minds to completely wipe away his own presence before they could wake him up again. Jamie stared into the abyss with a sly grin as he watched the thugs march to the mansion. Their eyes glazed and heartless while his mind held them captive to sing like canaries before plunging them straight for the lion's den. His dad had already decided the syndicate was going nuclear, so the whole family would be ripped out by its roots just as Jamie started plotting a terrifying power move. Jamie froze as Black stepped out from behind the alley and slammed his hand against the wall, causing the dark mana around him to instantly turn into liquid darkness that swallowed everything else and pulled Jamie right off the edge of reality before anyone could react. He locked eyes with the man in the air who looked like a wrecked kid, completely outmatched by Jamie. The guy's face was a whole mess of pure panic, zero comprehension, and absolute crying as he backed into a corner. He was totally helpless, but before Jamie could even process the threat, someone else came crashing through the air, tossed like a rag doll by someone way beyond his league. Jamie instantly went on high alert, scanning his surroundings for a jump scare. In this sketchy zone, anything could pop out from the shadows. Then it echoed down the street with an arrogant voice roasting Jamie and the guy who got tossed. Jamie tuned out the noise, trying to pinpoint exactly who he was dealing with. The loudmouth wasn't solo. He had backup, and his goons were whispering that all this yelling would pull security right into their VIP brawl. Jamie didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward with that superheroic bravado and casually asked, "Where did this wild psycho crawl out of?" Honestly, Jamie felt low-key furious about how random a layman would dare touch his personal soldiers, because the whole group was supposed to run an epic side quest for him, but now it was totally derailed. Plans got ruined as payback time arrived. The gang boss was about to deliver a harsh reality check while flexing terrifying power against that weak display, and then the cloaked mage locked his door aura onto the squad before they ever realized who they were messing with, staring blindly at his hidden face. Just by stepping forward, he stopped the Grim Reaper exactly when his two beaten liege boys were about to kill him. But that precious moment was not free. Instead, he mentally ordered them to finish the job while Honey, the rival crew's mid-tier boss, also raised his hand and commanded his minions to drag the two bruised thugs and the cloaked kid over to him. He stood up and threw his hands up, then shouted, "Let's go. I'm getting out of this world before you even get there." Jamie stared intensely at the loudmouth, knowing the NPC was about to unleash an absolute nightmare with that trash talk before his turn came. Honey's gang quickly grabbed Jamie's two pawns, who had just dodged a bullet thanks to the mage, only to end up right back square one. One of the guys broke down and sobbed loudly. He knew the game had ended. His entire world was now just a pathetic sight as he fell flatlined in 60 minutes or even closer. Fighting back felt like nonsense. Yet, instead of moving forward immediately, The cloak prodigy stood silently behind him, calculating every single frame of data required to pull off his next move without overextending himself right away. Jamie felt his own aura collapse while his two friends were thrown at him by a villainous gang member. A sudden, brutal blow shattered his head and left the killer completely unrecognizable as a human. The punch never stopped, turning Jamie into Swiss cheese before he even could scream. Honey laughed, knowing this was about to be a humiliating defeat for a brave kid who couldn't breathe. Yet, feeling like an untouchable god, she walked past the gore with a grin, begging for mercy from the mysterious Edge Lord as the camera cut away. The wizard's broken body flew off into a void that felt real, but was actually empty, so nothing else could really make sense now. A single eye in a twisted chair watched as the body screamed and bleeds on the floor, while his mind rushed to the next move, just as he saw Finn stepping forward with a grin. Honey froze in horror because he vividly remembered how to meld a kid wearing a black cloak, but he never let anyone touch Finn again. Instead, a chilling whisper brushed against his neck as Jamie grabbed him and roasted the boss for making a stupid mistake. Jamie dodged a wave of panic that whipped around him, instantly teleporting past his own face to strike at the boss instead. "Did you have fun packing up your minion?" he asked, not aiming for where the Reaper was supposed to go, but thriving right in front of everyone. A sudden gust of wind whipped through Honey's room, knocking over a stack of crumbling wood and sending the cold air straight into her lungs. She gasped as she realized that the strange cloaked figure had been lurking right outside her window for hours. No one could have tracked him down without her noticing the faint smell of burnt leaves and dust all along. That massive red warning sign wasn't just a shadow. It felt like a demon's breath, hanging right over the young mage. Jamie smirked as he dropped his cold warning. Don't act tough and rush in blindly when your mana is stuck at a pathetic level 3, because in this lobby he was completely outmatched. The Syndicate branch boss didn't want to just take the L and roll over. He was fighting tooth and nail right down to the wire in a desperate bid to break free from the mage's suffocating grip. Bro whipped out third-tier explosion magic to get the job done. Sure, it didn't pack that god-tier 5th-class punch, but it still hit like an absolute truck. He was dead set on incinerating this kid's tiny frame, turning the very brat who just clowned him into absolute ash. A sudden spark exploded between them, marking what was finally becoming the end of their fight, but only because it turned out that Jamie's mind was a trick rather than a weapon. My boy wasn't even scared. He just laughed so hard that everything became a broken puppet in his hand. It was such a delight to see him effortlessly turn the tables on these stubborn, smart fools who genuinely believed he was in trouble. Just as a few seconds ticked by and the boss vanished into an angry fall over his knees, he was instantly knocked out on his back. The sudden, violent rage of the mobster left him alone with a crushing bellyache and a life that felt like an end. His team watched the entire fight tumble down like mud, while his boss was completely flattened with zero sweat. That massive realization hit them all at once. They stood up against an absolute monster. They had to sprint hard before his ruthless anger locked onto them next. After his leader took out these goons for brutal beating, instead of begging or shouting, the crew just nodded in agreement and cursed their total luck for stepping foot here today. The very same guys who were plotting a great escape from battle then realized they were trapped inside, with no exit and no hope behind them all. Jamie took a single, deadly calculated step and instantly vanished from reality to put away the threat before anyone else could even think about what was happening. The young mage sneered with a dark satisfaction at seeing his team terrified, then slammed his fist into the mute button on their brains, spinning back as the big boss stood surrounded by his fallen crew, eager to take him out and lock him in for their own personal agenda. He viciously yanked the guy up by his hair to drag him toward the final command before dropping it. Step 1. Jamie had to get that skull full of top-secret intel, because holding the branch manager title means this guy was VIP access to the underground's darkest secrets. The final blast slammed him down, shattering hope and turning a brave hero into a silent, obedient zombie who only obeyed his new master. Like an unfixable broken record, he spilled the whole filthy blueprint about the underground child trafficking ring. Honestly, this wasn't a shocker for our boy, having already dug up those same sick details from his previous victims. But this juicy confession proved that the black market rumors were 100% true, giving him the perfect leverage to finally force his own father to come out of his own mouth. Now came the real headache: how to deal with the shattered gang leader when Jamie barely fought him. The physical shell stayed intact while the Grim Reaper already started to strike. Normally, a third-tier magic user biting dust would just respawn as an undead minion, but this body was shredded into pixel dust and destined to rot fast, bringing a horribly grotesque vibe to the scene. In blood-soaked trenches of a war zone, Jamie found his life's work over at the dead end. He had hit a mass panic trap where dropping a zombie in a city meant chaos. so he needed a cleaner alternative. He thought to himself, a third-tier Magicaster is basically a walking battery packed with mana reserve, and then clicked, time to get creative with recycling. He reached out to touch the limp figure and began pulling raw energy from it like a sudden storm drain, squeezing the last remaining magic right deep inside him while every single tick passed by. After those intense 5-minute battles, he finally felt like a fresh kid again. His body had completely reset to its full energy after that grueling fight. Jamie stared down at his two fallen victims, who looked like obedient dogs waiting for orders after being caught sneaking away on the ground. Even though he pumped mana back into them to keep their hearts beating, they were now dropping dangerously low. He needed a single move, or these valuable pieces would bleed out entirely. So a crazy high IQ strategy instantly popped into his head, a perfect shortcut to execute his master plan without burning time or stamina. To do this, he had to summon the dark magic of black and activate Jamie's loyal familiar instead, who was ready to drop everything to serve him without another second thought. Since these guys still hadn't finished their business, Jamie tapped into necromancy, the only viable play left, and waited for a perfect clutch. We are diving straight into the world where flesh puppets walk among corpses to resurrect them without a single moment of free will. So much so that they have officially lost their life rights, and the very air is full of pure, unadulterated paranormal chaos as two guys get permanently pinned down on their undead payroll. Jamie couldn't stand still while his shadow pet kept the magic from blowing out of him, so he forced himself forward to walk around like a mindless meat shield, completely ignoring how life and death would otherwise end. The loyal beast didn't even blink. Instead, it flooded the fresh zombies with a huge burst of backup mana and locked them down so tightly that they couldn't move again. His boy pushed the ritual so hard it went beyond limits, ready to turn his dead muscles into mindless action figures. But even pumping raw magic into them meant granting them a fake life. Soon, something started glitching. The guys were fighting back, desperately clinging to whatever souls remained behind them. It was actually pathetic after their physical beatdown over the last few hours, with odds of pulling through essentially non-existent. Jamie handed out the ultimate cheat code, as if it were a treasure chest of immortality, but Jamie was still fighting for their survival. Jamie slammed his hands against the walls as the room plunged into darkness, glowing with an eerie hollow light that signaled the spell was finally taking root. He pressed forward in time to finish the incantation before anyone could scream for help, refusing to let even a sliver of reality slip away from him. The purple-haired guy started screaming like a beast trapped in a pit of darkness first, then saw his friend's soul unravel just as quickly too. They both turned into walking ghosts moments after the monster lunged at them, leaving everyone to rest peacefully on their backs. Black was the absolute hard carry in all of this, working overtime to feed Jamie a massive, unending stream of raw magic power. Jamie stared down at his new creations with eyes locked on the screen, praying that this chaotic gamble finally landed in victory for his elite undead squad. As the first syllable of the second word slipped from their dead lips, he confirmed it was all total domination and they were now owned by him. But hold up. That split-second silence made Jamie wonder if the spell really worked flawlessly before it even started. Lurking right behind him, pitch-black, otherworldly aura oozed off their bodies like absolute nightmare fuel, and they stared right through him as their eyes totally hollowed out from processing reality. But after that chaotic ritual, Black started tweaking, pacing around like he sensed a massive glitch in the Matrix, leaving Jamie totally clueless. The kid snapped at his familiar to zip it and stopped stressing heavily, implying that having zero doubts was mandatory for their master plan to actually work. He was dead set on the fact that his little buddy had nailed the execution perfectly, so he tried brushing off the panic to keep the vibe stable. Deep down, Jamie swallowed his pride and realized he fumbled the bag himself. He kind of saw this epic fail coming, but watching his own flawed handiwork play out was a tough pill to swallow. Even though he didn't want to let his past crush him over his power status, catching himself making rookie mistakes still hurt terribly. He seriously debated scrapping these two unlucky test subjects right then and there if they couldn't execute his flawless strategy. Leaving for the dark energy abyss meant sneaking into Janice's holy turf or grabbing a drink at a local pub. Their stealth stats were literally zero. Meanwhile, Black was acting super unhinged and doing absolutely everything in his power to snap his spacing out master back to reality. To finally get Jamie to look down, a shadow beast literally chomped onto his cheek, screaming softly that he was ready to carry the team on his back. Jamie flared up low-key and offended because his minion had disrespectfully called out about the boss hierarchy like that. But once Jamie snapped out his funk and actually locked eyes with Black, the creature smoothly drifted down right onto the skull of one of the fresh zombies, staring intensely. By channeling his focus, The familiar could easily steal Jamie's dark aura and give his chaotic undead models a quick patch for stealth. Watching that massive demonic smoke screen vanish left Jamie absolutely hyped, knowing he had no idea his pet skill tree was this broken until Black flexed his abilities right then and there. He wiped away all the dust to make sure he could finally shine a light on his own master again. Jamie swept through the room looking for trouble, while the two corpses instantly snapped back into their average NPC selves, matching Master's original blueprints perfectly. Instead of a threat, he just saw his bloated familiar gassed out by the rogue magic Jamie had inadvertently unleashed. He rushed over to shower the little guy in hype, celebrating how they saved the tactical operation from flopping, while he pivoted back to give them official titles and just enough brain cells to do basic errands. Yen's got a new name as Azard, which perfectly matched his menacing, super toxic villain aesthetic. Meanwhile, Philip was slammed into the razzle tag, a nod to his beastly, blood-sucking vibe that totally broke with his pathetic begging from before. Jamie sparked them up with a single activation command, flashing a smug grin because he literally owned these two trapped souls now. At a moment when the air dropped instantly, the undead duo froze mid-step, locked in place as they prepared to tackle whatever twisted, impossible side quest their boss had thrown at them. Their empty eyes followed every flick of his hand and tracked the path he had chosen for the next step. Honestly, that whole scene was so funny because 5 minutes ago, those guys were trying desperately to escape a big bad corporation with a grand plan to start fresh. And now they're back in the same dirty business, just being the unskilled, rotting meat puppets, Jamie was staring blankly at the brain-dead pair, as if they were replaying a stuck video in their minds, totally paralyzed by an absolute freeze. Jamie stared at the blinking lights on his friends' flesh avatars and knew that, for all the magic they'd fought back from, there was still too much work left in their operating systems before any of them could finish calibrating their hot second. The deepening darkness made the dead feel like little children, while the gods lifted them up and dropped them into a world of eternal fear and curse. Out of nowhere, the newly minted Azard rasped a question about whether the kid was his maker, slowly piecing together wild reality checks as Jamie didn't even blink and instantly hardwired that creator meant absolute boss. The confused zombie questioned who this mysterious guy was, barely looking like he'd seen one day over 10 when his suffocating aura absolutely terrified him, completely defying logic because for a split second, it felt like this pint-sized powerhouse had clawed out of dark folklore and radiated pure, unfiltered malice with zero business in reality. The clock ticked down as primal dread spiked straight to its breaking point. The sickening pressure radiating off this so-called child made him feel like his skin was crawling away from reality. Jamie, who ate the horror up in pure panic like an open book, didn't even bother masking a twisted grin that showed him he was completely god-level dominant over whatever defiance his victim had left behind. Jamie stared at the dead man down the street, staring back with eyes that felt like they could crush him, and then looked up in pure terror as that volume of black mana roared around his neck, screaming exactly who owned the power right now. He couldn't help but stare at it with horror, thinking he had stumbled into a nightmare hell where nothing but trash remained to play with. Razzle roared at the demon lord being a human boy instead of himself, which made Jamie laugh so hard that it felt like the game had ended and they needed to learn proper obeisance from their masters next time. He looked down at his hands as if they were stained with magic, knowing that despite trying hard, the real trick hadn't really worked because he was still in control of everything. But our boy wouldn't let that slide. He'd grabbed the table with all his might to shove their grand master plan off its feet, so they were no longer safe. Just a gentle flick of his wrist, and boom. One guy fell face first into the dirt, instantly paralyzed right in front of Jamie. Jamie went full savage to prove himself, laying down brutal rules to show them exactly what happens when you cross your new boss. His absolute blind loyalty was his non-negotiable rule. Letting the silent stretch allowed him to lock eyes with the team and warn them that they had a free pass today, but if they ever glared at him like that again, game over. Jamie's voice cracked with anger as he declared he'd snap anyone who tried to keep their hearts in check, even if they looked like they were still free. The second guy was just standing there, eyes wide and a brain short-circuiting at the idea of being hurt by Jamie. Seeing his old buddy kiss the pavement so fast that Jamie knew instantly he had to act incredibly safe for his former friend. The dark mage stood silently, analyzing the two souls that had been captured just moments ago while he knew the game was over. Whatever they needed didn't matter now. The blood pact was sealed, turning them into absolute slaves to his will. He held their lives and death in his hands, a perfect law of the dark arts. He decided that if he could just pull back one little bit of the greatest evil, it would make all the difference when he dropped his biggest secret bomb right over his pets. He shrugs his tiny shoulders and jokes that, although he carries a terrifying aura, nobody was actually watching him do it. Instead, they were just staring at an ordinary guy who was painting a chaotic masterpiece. Razzle didn't shake off a stray bit of fear. He slammed it back in like he just won a big jackpot, and Jamie dropped everything to see if that terrifying sorcerer was really the only kind of demon left standing against him. He moved like lightning to drop their ultimate goal, stripping away the entire Church of Zenith and gathering all the hidden clues in the air before they even left. On top of that, he threw an adrenaline-fueled side quest into the scumbag's tracks down there and dragged him back while breathing. He needed real intel, not more mindless zombies. Taking the hint, his newly minted lackeys dropped their heads in a fit of protest, but didn't dare breathe any more air until they were officially part of the system, hardwired to execute whatever insane scheme their boss had dreamed up. Jamie stepped back as if to see if the terror still hovered above them, but reality hit him with a sudden, crushing weight that made his breath hitch. He saw Jamie standing there and immediately realized he was alone in a place so dead empty it felt like an open wound. The kid had vanished long ago, leaving them stranded in this alley just as they were about to process the absolute fever dream they survived. Locking eyes, they shared a silent, bewildered look, having zero clue how to even begin navigating this insane new reality. But before they could spiral, the mind control kicked into high gear, forcefully wiping their panic and spinning them right toward the church. They bolted out, perfectly programmed to deliver exactly what the Dark Mage ordered. Cut to that alley across the street, where Jamie's magical familiar was fiercely arguing with his master while the kid barely touched him at all. Jamie effortlessly yanked Black down on the leash of submission, making impossible rebellion possible no matter how furious he got. He just handed it over, and now there's no need to worry about his father or those scumbags hanging around him. Selling people crossed his ultimate red line, plus there was absolutely zero chance he'd ignore a backyard full of trash until someone else tried. After all, he was the heir, and this entire territory was destined to fall right into his lap anyway. He had been sneaking around for way too long, and right now the clock was ticking. If his maids or parents caught him missing from his bed, his cover would be completely blown. Muttering under his breath, he signaled that it was time to dip. He expected his magical familiar to just teleport them back, but out of nowhere a massive thud slammed directly into his spine. It happened so fast that his reflexes didn't even trigger. Spinning around with pure murder in his eyes, his glare softened slightly. A random kid had basically bulldozed into him, clearly sprinting for his life without checking his blind spots. Still, a supreme being trapped in a kid's body doesn't just let disrespect slide. His annoyance instantly spiked over this pathetic disruption. Sure, accidents happen, but touching a grand mage is a major mistake. He was seconds away from completely obliterating this clumsy pedestrian. He paused, catching himself right before unleashing chaos. It was literally Jamie, who had been pretending to be a grown-up for centuries, suddenly fell into a funny slump and realized he wasn't the boss anymore. He was just a 9-year-old kid staring at his own face while he pretended to be a dangerous adult boss. He sighed loudly and whispered that he was going to let him walk away completely without any trouble or embarrassment from anyone else watching, but secretly knowing that starting a street brawl over a bumpy shoulder would still go down as a very embarrassing little story. The little kid froze in mid-sentence as that tiny peer, who seemed so much older than he actually was, began explaining the rules of multiplication like a seasoned soldier. The confusion turned into a quiet moment of wonder when the kid finally realized his mistake. Suddenly, the kid found his voice roasting Jamie for acting like a boomer when he didn't even have a single gray strand on his head, because silver hair equaled supreme authority in this kid's brain, and that incredibly bizarre logic threw the Dark Mage completely off guard. Facing such a hilariously stupid comeback, Jamie genuinely blanked on how to counter it, since the kid wasn't technically wrong about the hair color, but was using it as a metric for maturity that was absolutely unhinged. Jamie saw the brat trembling in the dirt before he even realized what happened. Black Shadow Pet was glowing and practically screaming that it had been disturbed by a body. The audacity of his familiar blocking Jamie from catching a victim was insane, prompting him to lock a death glare on the scared child. As the alley temperature plummeted to sub-zeros, the overwhelming killing intent slammed into the kid, who now held back tears. Survival instincts surged as he scrambled forward apologizing, realizing his master chose peace over massing people. Seeing that the shadowy familiar accepted defeat instead of mutiny made Jamie's internal celebration loud and dramatic. But Black finally triggered their escape route just hours ago. They had burned way too much time playing in the streets. Now they needed to warp straight to his bedroom instantly, or everyone would flip out. When he hit the floorboards, Black went into full pout mode, acting totally betrayed by Jamie's scolding, and Jamie literally ignored every guilt trip he offered Zenith had finally found a way to break free from Zenith's curse. But that move only made him look even more dangerous as he dug deep into the ground. Jamie stared up at the ceiling, his tiny knuckles cracking under just thinking about how cursed names made him turn into pure, unadulterated venom. His entire past history had been ruined by that fake deity, leaving only one thing on his menu: a slow, highly destructive revenge move against the heavens. Zenith could easily spawn armies of zealots for all he cared, but it wouldn't change anything at all. The absolute bloodlust radiating from his glowing eyes was terrifyingly authentic. He was breathing hard now, dragging that corrupt god straight down to hell. Meanwhile, back in the grimy city streets, his mind-controlled pawns were finally making their move. Assad stepped out of the shadows, ready to ambush his old crew, needing answers and fast. Hanny made a promise that would turn out to be a complete disaster because his brain just short-circuited, yet Jens was standing right there fully intact, and it hit Hanny like a truck. His partner must have gotten absolutely wrecked by the man, who couldn't even use a single drop of mana. Jens swung his fist hard against a brick wall inches away from the thief, letting dust swirl around him as the air grew thick with an unspoken, loud threat. The punch hit with such force that Jens's face vanished like a ghost in his own time. He was running out of patience and had a strict mission to finish his job, so there was no time for slow interrogations or hesitation from the syndicate lackey who spilled out claiming silence about the dead. Knowing his squad was already gone, the thug panicked and tried to grab back at his own neck before the ghostly boss finally showed up with a terrifyingly powerful aura, forcing him to scramble for air before he could even finish what he started. Philip's cold gaze lowered until his face was nearly ice cold as he pressed close to the thug, demanding to know if those facts were real or just a way to buy time, while sweating bullets pointed them to him. If the hostages didn't believe him, they'd easily question every other member of that gang. But this was getting ridiculous, and they needed the leader to finish their mission. So he knew exactly where the dirty secrets were hiding in the shadows. That meant he had all the missing puzzle pieces for the church too. Philip stared at the impossible threat and suddenly felt the world turn upside down, realizing that no amount of precise maps could stop a rat from sneaking away before anyone got there. He had to make a simple bet instead, hoping for an educated guess on where the monster would disappear so the trapped gangster wouldn't have to fight another day. He kept his head down while the gang members cheered him on to the rooftop of their underground club, ready to turn every single drink into an invitation for a wild ride. The two undead looked at each other in silence and saw that crashing through local bar doors was their best way to catch a falling thief. He finally let out a giant sigh of pure relief, completely trusting that he'd somehow managed to escape the grave in time. Bam! The stronger enforcer instantly hooked up to the kid's jaw with a force so strong his lights went out and shattered his dreams of walking away. But they weren't just letting him stay. Their master strictly ordered them to drag a living witness back. And this unconscious clown was the perfect ticket to expose the horrific child smuggling ring. Now, however, they had a slight logistical headache. Where do you stash a kidnapped mobster? They debated chaining him up in the creepy woods, but the other vetoed that instead, suggesting they just toss him into their own private warehouse instead. It was way more secure and totally off the grid. Azar casually tossed the unconscious man down behind him, and the scene broke instantly into chaos as they tried desperately to get any trace of the culprit's identity out of their hands. Cut to a different part of the city. A figure was frantically trying to pry open the door to a notorious shady dive bar that had once swarmed with the worst scum imaginable, but now it was just an empty, ghost town where nothing moved except the wind and a quiet, eerie silence. With every step he took, he stumbled across more lifeless bodies and slipped on thick crimson pools that looked exactly like Jamie's dead friend earlier. What kind of monster was this? He tried to block out the horrifying reality that everyone in the room had been slaughtered before him, knowing he couldn't get any answers soon. 5 minutes ago, he was sweating like a bad omen while getting beat up by guys who had gone completely offline. Survival instincts kicked in, and he sprinted away, knowing that if anyone showed up, he'd end up dead meat from watching the mess. As the sun started its golden journey through those huge windows, a bright new day began on the estate. But deep down today, it would be a completely different game than before, and dodging that fate wasn't going to work. The young master sighed deeply, mentally preparing himself for a grueling schedule he desperately wanted to avoid. Since there was no choice but to accept it, he hastily put on his clothes to face the music, ready to take on whatever came next outside his door. Taking one final breath before locking eyes with his magical familiar, he had to urgently cut off that connection. His dad's radar was clearly acting up right now, sensing someone lurking around just as he did. Jamie kicked open the door with a grin and pulled out his golden sun mask, stepping in to say hi to everyone while waving goodbye to the guests. but only his dad replied. His mom was completely missing from breakfast as they sat around the table. The head of the house felt totally chill and flashed a warm smile while asking how he slept. Jamie almost sighed in relief at her absence until he spotted a familiar lock of hair peeking out, proving that the universe still hated him. He got caught by a giant bear hug during a massive withdrawal, yet he loved watching his golden child perform on stage while being utterly oblivious about her secret hiding spot. A total fake out. In reality, he spotted her miles away, just praying he could delay his daily dose of torture for a few seconds longer. His mom was practically glowing and totally hyping herself up over her successful sneak attack. She eagerly asked if she spooked him, but Jamie smoothly spun it, claiming it was more of a blessing than a jump scare. Jamie stared at the girl who would be glued on his side all day and felt a strange urge to steer the situation away from the sweetest, most clingy man in town, because she needed something to break her feeling about him. A double team plan was already working when his little sister slipped into the trap, turning their supposed two-way hug sandwich into an incredibly messy and dangerous war zone filled only with weapons of family love. He finally fought his way out, demanding his basic right to eat, officially kicking off a meal that got hijacked by this cringe cuddle fest. His mom swiftly shifted her radar to her next target, the little sister, and she totally ate up all the attention without even a fight. She was practically beaming, soaking in all that pure affection. Catching this, Jamie actually had a split-second glitch. He seriously felt the urge to squish his sister's ridiculously chubby soft cheeks. It was nearly impossible to resist, but reality crashed back down, and he instantly mentally slapped himself for letting his guard down and going off script. As the plates cleared, the family started hyping up some massive event dropping tomorrow. Jamie was completely out of the loop. He was still annoying his sister for staring at her while he held out his hand for tea, but now he knew that staying current on family history and avoiding the city gossip would save him from getting ruined by it all. Artino blinked and shook his head, clearly forgetting to tell his oldest son what was about to happen. A sudden flash of guilt burned in his chest as he stared at the scene unfolding before him. His mom chimed right back immediately, dodging the blame by saying it slipped her mind just like she did. She used all her chronic worry as a shield against any criticism, and Jamie instantly connected all those dots to explain the situation clearly. Even knowing her dramatic personality and that scary visual, she definitely gave rise to major nightmares about that day when he pulled off that crazy full-body breathing technique. Jamie felt awkward enough to drop a quick apology for spiking her blood pressure, mostly just to lock in trust points, even though his mom waved it off because she was solid as long as her kids were breathing. Jamie would have had to pull a stunt so hard that she might literally fall through the floor and scream in pain at her own stress. Jamie had snapped back to focus, but he realized his time wasn't enough for another chase. The real danger came from that massive elite gala hosted by the Count and Welton, where every high roller in the Eastern Kingdom of Seldom was already listed as a VIP. Jamie felt a sharp pang of guilt as his beloved free time disappeared, leaving behind only the frantic rush to catch up with his mom before she vanished into that fancy shindig he had been so obsessed about. As night fell, he threw on his cloak and slipped into the shadows, ready to ghost through the city in a hurry. That time he walked with a loyal magical sidekick, ordering them to hunt down the two undead minions that were so eager to keep grinding through the day. He landed right at his target drop zone in perfect precision and then slipped into the shadows to check on his undead crew, who had just knocked out a solid chunk of the work. From there, he stalked through the terrain completely alone, no longer needing Black to hold his hand. Meanwhile, the heavy door groaned open into a pitch-black room where everyone had finally finished their status reports and dropped them onto their crumbling backs. Both of them stared intensely at the dark floor as they knew this high-stakes operation was built directly on their broken shoulders. They were ready to make every single move. Jamie whipped back his hood, cutting straight to the chase about his commands, demanding to know their actual progress. One of